Hello everyone and welcome to the Year of Yu-Gi-Oh! The video you're about to watch is an in-depth analysis. If you haven't seen the show or this season, I suggest you watch that before coming back to this video. This year is the year that the Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise as a whole turns 20, so this year is a bit of an interesting thing for me in regards to this show. Almost everything I review on Childhood Throwback can be summed up in one jokey review like I usually do, but Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the exception to this. One of the only shows that exists that I can't just give one 30-minute review to and give my entire opinion. Anyone who knows me knows that I've said my favorite fictional character is and always will be Spider-Man, for how much he's impacted me as a person. Yu-Gi-Oh! Did impact my life about the same amount that Spider-Man did, but not in the same way. It impacts me in a way of pure nostalgia, being the one show I would always go out of my way to watch as a child. It may not have changed me as a person, but when I think about childhood, I think about Yu-Gi-Oh! That's why today, I'm going to be analyzing this show to the best of my ability, not going to the way that I usually do, where I go through the show and make fun of it. I could do that with shows like Enter the Dragon, because most episodes of that show are the same. There's no real overarching plot. But Yu-Gi-Oh! Is different. It's too long for me to review the entire show in just one sitting. And really, any joke I could make, you guys could make it while watching it as well. Plus, I doubt I could write anything funnier than what little Karibo does. What I'm here to do is to try to dig deep into this show, talk about the impact it had on my life, and what it does with its characters through each of its 5 seasons. Now before you guys say anything, yes, I'm digging way deeper into this than I'm betting even the show wants me to. And I'm taking this similar style with the still frames and deep analysis from one of my favorite YouTube channels, Geekvolution. I'm also doing this to avoid copyright. I recommend checking out his channel after this, as he has a lot of videos, and they're a lot better than mine. Also, I'll be looking at the English dub of the show exclusively, only bringing up comparisons to the Japanese version when I feel I need to, since the English version is what I watched as a child. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a show that is very hard to describe to people to get them to take it seriously. Because, well, you can't. It's a show about a 16-year-old shy kid who uses the spirit in his 5,000-year-old pendant to win card games. That sounds absolutely ridiculous to people who don't watch the show, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend that this show isn't insanely silly. Because it is. This show is absolutely balls-off-the-wall crazy. It has ancient Egypt, soul-snatching, Atlantis, and giant monsters of darkness with dragons for penises. But more on those last things later. So I'm not going to sit here and convince you that this show is some masterpiece with deeper meanings. Although certain characters in certain seasons go through character arcs, and arcs that I find interesting, the show is a stupid fun ride. What's actually hard about doing an analysis of this show is that some seasons give certain characters arcs, while others are just fun rides that advance the story with nothing that's happening character-wise. Which is funny as well, as all this show needed to do was show cool card games, as this was a show just designed to sell you things. It's like if Batman and Robin was a card game instead of a superhero movie. I'm going to start off by talking about the character arcs that are in this season. As for me, it's what salvages the season, since the duels themselves are frustrating this time, although I'll get to that a little later. Joey's arc is one that I can talk about briefly, as it isn't finished by the end of the season. But what is brought up here is very interesting in its own right. We get to see Joey's progression as a duelist throughout the season. Joey's the hothead, the tough guy who always tries to fight, never going for a different solution or using his head. His character arc in this season, though, is to learn responsibility, especially since he's dueling for a noble cause, similar to Yugi dueling for his grandpa. Joey's dueling for his sister, as without the prize money that can be won at the tournament, his sister's Serenity could lose her eyesight. What's good about this arc is how Joey has to learn to play the game. Before, he was just a hothead who barely understood the game and really just tried to win because he thought he was so great. But now that he's fighting for someone else, he has to learn the game as best he can. They tie his arc to his skill in the card game. The more Joey learns how to play, the more responsible he becomes. But he also has to learn that he has to duel on his own. As the first few duels Joey goes through, he has Yugi's help, giving him the best strategies to beat his opponents. Spoilers for future seasons, but it is said by Kazuki Takahashi, the man who created the franchise, that Joey's the best duelist in the show, due to his deck not having the same budget Kaiba has, nor the puzzle Yugi has to help him win his duels. While that is true, it's an interesting way to end Joey's character arc, even if it isn't really in the forefront. It shows how Joey goes from being one of the worst, because he thinks he's one of the best, but then becomes the best, when he realizes he has to grow up and start to mature and grow as a person. Of course, this is developed more in future seasons, so I'll discuss where Joey's character arc goes in future videos. Kaiba also has a pretty good character arc in this season. even if it is pretty much ignored in later seasons. At the beginning of the show, and this season, he appears to be a character who only cares about winning, not caring at all about his opponent, only caring about being the best, until in a way, Yugi opens his mind in a way by beating him. Doing so confuses Kaiba, making him wonder how Yugi was able to get what he needed, as opposed to just being lucky like most people would think. Then again, they do say that within the history of this card game, not one person has been able to summon this ultimate creature that Yugi used to defeat Kaiba, which I find really strange and really doesn't make any sense, but now I'm getting off track. He starts to think more and more about what Yugi said might have been right, about believing in himself and in his cards. Yeah, I know it sounds dumb, but that's how the show works, kind of going with the idea that if you believe in yourself, you'll accomplish your goals. They could have just gone down the route of just having Yugi beating him, being the catalyst to him learning his lesson and trusting in his cards, but thankfully they went a bit farther than that, by trying to parallel what happened with Yugi. They decide to sort of go with the same idea what Yugi has to go through this season, having really the only family Kaiba has left kidnapped as well, his brother Mokuba, starting off only being captured physically, only for his soul to be captured as well, like Yugi's grandpa, causing Kaiba to learn the lesson Yugi was trying to teach him, finally having a real reason to win, to save his little brother, even risking his own life to save him, showing that even though he didn't seem like a good person at first, there was someone that he cared for, and when that happens, the real good person can come out. He tries to believe in his cards in his duels with Yugi and Pegasus later on, that strategy even working for him partially with Pegasus, trying to get around Pegasus' ability to read minds, when he tries drawing cards without looking at them, and always getting what he needs because he believed. I do like this for a character arc. It's a good way to take the character that in a way is supposed to not only be a rival, but also a secondary antagonist in the very beginning, and slowly grow his character. Even though at the very least in this season, he's a very minor player, although he thankfully becomes a much more important and better character in later seasons. Sadly, since Kaiba isn't the main character, and since we have to establish that Pegasus is a threat in the story, he ends up losing. And while that does work in favor of Pegasus as a villain, it does kind of falter Kaiba's arc, as he learns what Yugi wanted him to learn, but he doesn't win in the end. He gets captured just like his brother. All just because Yugi has to be the one to beat him in the end, because he's the main character. Maybe they could be establishing that even though Kaiba was right to trust in himself and his cards, Yugi had the power and determination to finally take him down. Plus, what's really frustrating about this arc is that this lesson really seems to hold true for Kaiba at the end, but yeah, I'll delve more into that in Season 2. Mai also goes through a bit of an arc. Her character's probably the only one that changes the most out of all of them, starting off as an antagonist for Joey, even cheating her way in her duels, until she loses to Joey. She of course sees the examples that are given by Yugi and Joey. She in a way is Kaiba's character arc done right. She learns to trust in herself and her cards in order to achieve her goals. That there is more to life than winning all the time, especially if she doesn't have anybody to share the victory with. She learns how to have friends, and to get close to people again. Unfortunately, that's all I can really say about her arc in this season, since that's all that really happens. Her arc isn't really finished this season, though. It's expanded upon in later episodes. We don't really get much here in regards to Mai's backstory. Why she goes into dueling, why she got so cynical, none of that. She just has a small arc that I guess they put in to fill time. Even though we don't get a lot, I'll admit what's here is pretty good, showing that people can change for the better with the right example. And Mai's arc is important, especially since she does play into my favorite arc of the season, Yugi's. I've saved Yugi's arc for last because not only do I feel it's the most interesting, it's where the majority of this meat of the season comes from. Dealing with the ideas of identity, and what he feels he needs to do to win, and even having fear at what this force that's controlling him when he plays these games will do. Although it's not the plot of the entire season, it is delved into enough to get you thinking. Much more than you would expect from a show like this. All of this drama being caused by an event late in the season, but still one that impacts things greatly. The second duel with Yugi and Kaiba. We see the spirit of the puzzle's true colors in a way, showing that him and Kaiba were more similar than we first thought. Whereas with Kaiba, he went from having to win due to pride, to having to win to save his brother. Where it's a similar thing we learn with the spirit of the puzzle. He feels he has to win at any cost. Like how Kaiba was willing to risk his life to win, the spirit was willing to take a life just to win as well. Most shows like this just have the good generic good guy who can do no wrong, so it's a nice change of pace that he actually did something wrong, nearly killing someone to achieve his goal. Thankfully, Yugi was able to stop him, which causes an aura of mistrust. Which is interesting as throughout the season, Yugi learns about the spirit controlling his actions, and Yugi's arc this season is to learn to fully trust and master his puzzle, and I like that they go through all the motions of it really starting off with him learning about the presence within himself, seeing that it's doing good, so he lets his guard down, only for that part of him to go too far, causing Yugi to not only not trust the spirit anymore, but to quit dueling altogether, despite the fact that doing so means he can lose his grandfather forever, even if it is only for one episode. I like that even though he starts off this series with the puzzle already being solved and the spirit already being an established entity, we still see an actual relationship form between the two. Most kids' shows have the generic good characters meet and instantly become friends, but this show seems a touch more realistic in that regard. Both of them have flaws and have to learn to trust each other and work together in order to accomplish their goal. As stated earlier, Mai does play a factor into this arc, mainly her having a duel with Yugi in the finals after the traumatic event with Kaiba. While the duel itself isn't especially interesting, we see Yugi and the spirit have a sort of inner battle. Yugi not letting the spirit have full control, holding himself back, being scared that he'll go too far again. A lot of the time, you would just see instant forgiveness in shows like this, but I'm glad they actually had to show Yugi getting over what happened. While I like the idea that Yugi has to learn how to trust the spirit for the two of them to become close in order to beat Pegasus, it happens way too late in the game for me. The idea they seem to go with that in the beginning, Yugi doesn't know about the spirit, and thus the spirit is allowed to have free reign, which causes him to accomplish his victories, and it's only when Yugi finds out about the spirit, and the spirit breaks his trust, that Yugi starts to falter, because he isn't fully focused on accomplishing what he set out to do. I almost feel like an idea like this should have been played to the opposite. Have the spirit be rash and almost an evil presence at first, doing whatever it can to win. But when Yugi learns about him, he learns that he isn't all evil, and they spend the whole season learning how to work together. I also like how in the beginning the spirit is used as a sort of physical representation of Yugi's inner confidence. Sort of the idea that Yugi needed to trust in himself more, and the spirit of the puzzle fills that void for him because at the moment he's too timid and too shy to really stand up for himself. They really seem to hint at this idea, by having Yugi's voice instead of the spirit's inside of his own head. We see Yugi in his head formulate a strategy, then for the spirit to put that strategy into action. We're given the idea that Yugi's a good duelist at his core, and he would be a great one if he learned to trust in himself more and be more confident. This is something that once again is delved into later, but we do get enough here for a full arc, as by the end, Yugi and the spirit have to work separately in order to work around Pegasus' mind control advantage. They switch places every time it's Yugi's turn, he'll play the card face down that he needs, and then they'll switch back to the spirit, who doesn't even know what cards Yugi played. Going from Yugi not trusting the spirit at all, into both of them having to trust each other enough in order to believe that they played the right card they needed, which is a beautiful way to end his arc. They call it the mind shuffle. Most shows just have the main character being the best because he's the main character, and while that's still a bit of a true statement as they sort of give that trait to the spirit of the puzzle, what they do here is a good way to stay out of the realm of generic, by having Yugi always having the skill he needs to win, but not having the confidence to put his skills into action, only doing so after being shown the right example by someone who in a way becomes his closest friend, both figuratively and literally. While Pegasus is a good villain for the most part, the stuff done with his character near the end comes out of left field for me. I never understood why he thought dueling Yugi in the Shadow Realm at the end was a good idea. The Shadow Realm, for those of you who don't know, is an alternate dimension where if you lose a card game in it, you lose your soul and are tortured for all eternity. Think of it like hell, but with less fire and more purple smoke. Either way, this is jarring to me because this is an official tournament, and he's the creator of the card game. Any tournament that he would host would, of course, be counted, so why would he risk his reputation just to keep cheating? But that's a small thing. The bigger thing is this. The entire season they make him this threatening, creepy, despicable bastard, who seems to enjoy causing pain and torment, and allowing him to be intimidating, because he can read your mind. But then out of nowhere, we find out through a flashback that the reason he was doing what he was doing was because he had a sick wife who died and he wanted to bring her back. You really can't have your cake and eat it too on this one. You can't have him be an evil, maniacal, laughing villain for most of the season, then just play the whole, oh, he was a nice guy the whole time card at the end to make us feel sorry for him. I wish they would have gone a bit more into hiding this little secret of his, or not make him so evil that the big reveal at the end just seems jarring. Either play up his evilness, or more the sadness of the character. For most of the season, before we find this out, he is a fun, interesting villain. I especially love the fact that his big obsession is cartoons. Despite him filling the role of generic big corporation villain in the end, and being the maniacal villain, Pegasus has a very charming personality that actually makes you like him. Being more cheery and happy a lot of the time, taunting his opponents, giving them nicknames, well, the same nickname anyway. Plus him having a deck revolved around tunes is very creative, instead of just having the generic most powerful cards in the game because he's the final adversary of the season. Even though his cards do have that kind of power, they're still designed creatively enough that I don't mind as much. We are also given a good explanation as to where these cards came from and why up to this point nobody's heard of them. With Pegasus being the creator of the card game, it would make sense that there would be a set of cards closer to his heart than others, and he would decide to keep it to himself. With a show like this that's only designed to sell toys, you needed a villain that would stand out enough to keep the audience's attention. And aside from the motivation I mentioned earlier in this season, Pegasus really does excel as a villain, it being even better since they don't kill the villain off in the end, meaning he could come back for future seasons. Sadly though, most characters in the show fall into the trope of being a generic one-note character with only one thing that defines them. Mako Tsunami likes the ocean, so he uses a fish deck. Panic scares people and likes the dark, so he uses a deck revolving around fear and darkness itself. And of course Weevil Underwood, the guy who likes bugs, is really slimy, small, and of course a cheater who uses bug cards. I know I shouldn't complain because this is a kid's show, and really we're lucky that we got such deep character stuff with Yugi and the majority of the main cast that I mentioned earlier. But it's frustrating to me that the show seems to try a bit more than just be a blatant commercial for the card game, with having the main characters not only go through arcs, but having an overarching plot that has a logical conclusion. Only for them to give us generic characters who are only there as random adversaries to get in Yugi and Joey's way. Now I understand that it's kind of par for the course for a show like this that has a tournament as its backdrop for the story, but with the exception of most of the characters that make it to the finals, no other character really gets any kind of, well, character to him. Even Bandit Keith is just your generic bully character, and I find it odd that they make him the one American on the show. The only real character it works with is Bakura, as not only does he serve a purpose in terms of getting Yugi and the Spirit to meet for the first time, it's very clear they're setting him up for later things. Plus, it's interesting that even though Bakura is more the villain you would expect, just being evil for the sake of evil, they try to pull off a kind of parallel between him and Yugi, but instead of it being with Kaiba and their situations, it's more of what they're like, both having items with spirits that possess a host. This season's a nice way to introduce the character, but I really can't talk about him much here because he doesn't really get in development until the final season. Although seeing this character and having him introduced was a nice touch, so they don't have to spend time in later seasons developing him as a threat, even if we don't learn much about him this season. What's weird about Duelist Kingdom is that it's both a fun ride and advances the plot through Yugi's character arc. However, what's hard about giving this a deep analysis is that aesthetically, this is a very sloppy and hard to watch season for me without any person with me to laugh at it, especially since this season is a very simple story. As I said earlier, later seasons find a way to balance the ridiculous with the dramatic, making it still a fun ride, but this season was still trying to get its feet off the ground, and the voice actors were still trying to get just the right voice for the characters, although they do get their voices sounding right by the time of the tag duel. Also, the ways they allow Yugi to win a lot of his early duels before he gets to the finals make absolutely no sense. The show does get its footing finally once it gets to the finals. One of the problems with the first season is that it adds new rules to a game we didn't even know the original rules for yet. What I mean by this is when I talk about the field power bonus rule they add in this season. Quite frankly, it seems to be there just to give characters certain advantages, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Sometimes it's flat out even ignored, the biggest example being the duel against the spirit of the puzzle and Kaiba's dark side. Despite them being in a forest area, the field power bonus that should be there is never mentioned or taken advantage of by either character. And then it gets to some duels where it just seems like it's a contrivance, so Yugi has a bit more of a struggle in his first few duels. Especially in the duel against Mako Tsunami, Weevil Underwood, and Panic. Mako and Panic being the worst offenders of this due to the fact that their strategies in a way are cheating, hiding their monsters underwater and in darkness so Yugi can't see him. This can't be done in a real tournament. The person hiding his monsters would be disqualified if he tried this, and then Yugi wins both duels in ways that literally couldn't be done if they weren't dueling with holograms, and seeing things like that in the show frustrates the hell out of me. They talk about how Yugi's such a good duelist, but he wins in ways that are literally impossible. Yugi defeats him by destroying the Castle of Dark Illusion's flotation ring, because that move would totally work if they weren't using holograms. Quite frankly, Yugi should have won that duel with a different maneuver, one that would have made some kind of sense if they were playing the game normally as opposed to with these stupid rules. And what perplexes me even more is how these field power bonuses work. They try to explain how it works in the duel between Weevil and Yugi, but quite frankly they don't explain how it's nothing more than some stupid rule they considered for the game, but realize it would only hinder the game if it was used. The two things they try to explain with it is that A, the monsters gain a certain amount of attack points depending on which monsters are used in which area. For example, water monsters would gain a power bonus in an ocean area, grass monsters would gain a power in a grass area, and so forth. And B, that certain monsters are immune to what they call magic-based attacks. But the problem with both of these is that they aren't explained enough. How much do these monsters gain with a field power bonus? A lot of the time it seems to be a complete random. If they wanted us to take it more seriously, they should have explained how much they would gain. And they also don't explain what they mean by magic-based attacks. They seem to imply that it's monsters who use magic cards to enhance their strength. That's why in the duel with Weevil, Yugi's Feral Imp attack doesn't work, yet Curse of Dragon using Burning Land does, so it feels inconsistent. I honestly would have wished this whole field power bonus factor would have never been brought in, especially since it doesn't play any kind of factor into the finals. It honestly would have made even more sense if it was reversed, if the field power bonus didn't come in until the finals, because then it would catch the players off guard and they would have to think on their feet more to try to get out of the situations they're put in. But as it stands, it feels pretty pointless. The actual plot of the season is pretty uneventful in terms of actual things happening. While there's a lot of character stuff, the actual plot for the most of Duelist Kingdom can be summed up with Yugi and or Joey find an opponent, they duel, Yugi and or Joey win duel, they get a star chip, and then they move on. I wish more actual plot progression happened during the tournament itself, although some cool stuff happens during the finals, mainly the duel between Yugi and Pegasus, which is my favorite in the season by the way, and with it being the final one of the arc, it should be, mainly due to the mind shuffle strategy I mentioned earlier. Like the field power bonuses should have done before, it brings a new twist to the games we saw before. Plus, some actual pretty awesomely designed monsters and moves. Another good one is Joey vs. Yugi in the finals, even if that duel does get kind of a BS happy ending. The final one I'll give credit to is the tag team duel, just because, like the mind shuffle strategy, it's not only is it cool to see them, it's something different. There's also some small story stuff done in Season 1 after Duelist Kingdom. There isn't enough in there to make a full video, so I'll talk about that briefly here. The legendary hero stuff is only there to set up villains for a future season. What's actually done in this story isn't very interesting, and even though they enter the video game, the actual rules of the game itself are confusing and don't make sense. Plus, the arc itself is very short. Only 3 episodes. I have to wonder what was the point of putting it in there at all. Nobody goes through an arc. There's no duels, nothing you really want to see in a Yu-Gi-Oh show, aside from just some cool monsters doing cool things. Side note, I don't understand how the Millennium Puzzle works in this virtual world setting. It's established early on when the puzzle's activated, the spirit of the puzzle's mind takes over Yugi's body. So if Yugi's mind is in cyberspace, how can they switch back and forth? If someone can answer this for me, I'd like to know. And there's nothing notable about the Dungeon Dice Monsters arc aside from the fact that it looked like a fun game and Duke's evil plan was stupid and made no sense. I know I'm repeating myself a lot, but that's how this show works. He wanted to prove that Yugi cheated at Duel Monsters by beating him at Dungeon Dice Monsters, a game that Duke invented and that Yugi had never played before. Wow. I think I've seen evil plans in comedy movies that made more sense than that one. I know I spent a lot of your time now rambling about this show. You probably think I've delved more into this than I should, and I'm not going to disagree with you there. Although this season seemed to be the sloppiest in the actual duels, the character stuff they had was interesting enough to keep me watching, and I wish it would have delved more into that. If they actually would have known exactly how the game was going to play, and give us duels that were like the finals, the entire Duelist Kingdom would have been excellent. Overall, I'm giving this season a 6 out of 10. While it's good, it definitely could have been a lot better. I'll see you guys next month for Battle City. Long ago